We're talking to Sam and Todd, who are partners in life and in business. And they're DINKs, double income, no kids. They play a huge role in their nieces and nephews' lives, and because of the proximity of all of their families, they get to see everyone really regularly. Particularly for heteronormative, cisgender, married couples, there's a societal pressure for them to have kids of their own. But I really admire that Todd and Sam recognized that actually they were getting quite a bit of fulfillment with their relationships with their nieces and nephews, and everybody benefits. For anyone listening who might be experiencing some of that pressure, whether it's from family or society that they must have children, I hope this story inspires you, because Todd and Sam have created an incredible life for themselves, and they get to have those deep connections with their nieces and nephews. It's really win-win for everyone. Please enjoy DINKs, double income, no kids. Hi, welcome to Doing This Differently, a podcast that celebrates non-traditional family structures. I'm your host, Nicole Foley, a solo mom living in San Francisco with my daughter, Dylan. In each episode, we talk to families who are forging their own unique paths, and together we expand our definition of what family looks like. Many of us think of family as the typical nuclear structure, parents and their children. But if we're really fortunate, we grow up with additional parental figures who provide guidance and support throughout our lives. Today, we're talking to a child-free married couple who have played a really important role in their nieces and nephews' lives. And there's a nickname for this type of family, DINK, double income, no kids. Sounds dreamy. Oftentimes, there is a misconception that if a married couple chooses not to have children, that means that they don't like children, don't want to be around children. But that's not the case for many DINKs, and certainly not true of today's guests. As I always say, families come in all flavors, and I think DINKs can be met with quite a bit of curiosity, since this is a very unique path in most cultures. It challenges societal norms, and we'll dig into all of that. So now I'd like to introduce our guests, Sam Choi Cadley and Todd Cadley. Sam is an entrepreneur and creative living in Brooklyn, New York. She was born in Seoul, Korea, and is the youngest of 3 girls. She immigrated to the U.S. when she was 4 years old and has lived in the New York City area ever since. Todd is Sam's husband of almost 10 years as of next week. Todd was born and raised in New Jersey and has lived up and down the East Coast. He's been in New York for almost 13 years. So these two are life partners and business partners. Sam founded the incredible Brooklyn-based creative agency Manual Labor 12 years ago, and she and Todd have been running it together for almost 7. They have an adorable fur baby, Sadie, who has a signature side-eye. And I got to meet this cutie when I was in Brooklyn in April. Todd, Sam, welcome.
Hi.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, nice to be here.
Thank you so much for being here and sharing your story. Tell us a little bit about the environment you each grew up in and how you envision your future as it relates to family.
Like you said, I'm one of 3. I'm the youngest of 3 girls. As far as family, like my parents were amazing, supportive parents, but they worked all the time. And so my sisters and I were super close. I think the relationship that we had was always very close, very supportive, and it sort of extends into adulthood now.
Mine was a little different. I grew, and I think it's kind of relevant to your podcast, as you know, I grew up in a divorced family. However, my parents got divorced when I was 5 and my sister was 10. It never put me and my sister in the middle of it, and realized the importance of giving us the best possible outcomes, because their marriage didn't work, right? And they each were, got married, and so we had our holidays together, birthdays together, and they made it work. And so, I think the definition of nuclear family, and I think you would agree, is complete bupkis. I think it's about family, and family, like comes in all shapes and sizes. And so when I was, younger, I never was worried about finding a partner or getting married. It was just something that I knew was part of my life. I just didn't know the no kids yet part yet.
Sure. Yeah. And I've heard from many couples who have chosen to remain child-free that they field many questions over the years. Can you tell us about the road that you took in terms of deciding not to have children?
Well, because we had met later in life, it made it a lot easier. I mean, I think if we had married really young, that would have probably been more discussions and deeper thoughts. Personally, I'm not sure I grew up even imagining myself with a huge family. I think until I met Todd, we talked about it for about a week and just kind of thinking about, hey, do we want to have kids? What would that entail? What would that take?
Mm.
And then I think very quickly on, we were like, hey, since we met later, let's invest the time in each other, in our nieces, our nephews, our dogs, our business. So that is the part that I think is incredibly fulfilling for us, because that's where we give back and we get from.
Side note, as preparation for this episode, I had an earlier conversation with Todd and Sam, and Todd shared quite a bit about their thought process with regard to we're older, do we want to have kids? Here's a clip of that conversation.
Coming from a family where my stepfather treated me like his blood son,
Mm-hmm.
and knowing the cultural disparities at times of, well, that's not your kid. And he was always like, that's my kid as much as anything. Just like I would say my stepfather as much as my father, my real father was. I always said, if we really wanted to have a child, let's adopt. And let's do that. And so every, year for like 3 years, we were like, okay, let's have this conversation. And every year we were like, we're good. We're good. And it was healthy. It was, we both agreed and we were both in alignment on where we wanted our lives to be together. Because we always said, like, if that was the case, then we would have to make some really large fundamental changes to our lives. And at that moment in time, we weren't ready to make those changes.
I don't even remember us having conversations for that long, but I think what we did say was, I can't promise that at some point when I'm 75, there won't be 1 week where I regret not having kids, right? I'm like, it may only last a week, but I think there will be probably, as we start facing our own mortality, of like, what is the legacy I'm leaving behind?
Right.
How have I made an impact on the people? And again, like it goes back to nieces, nephews, families, friends. It doesn't necessarily have to be look at my doppelganger, right? I don't need to see a physical manifestation of myself to feel like I have left a mark on people's lives.
I love the self-reflection that Sam describes. We can't know how we're going to feel at 75, whether we had children or not. Having children does not necessarily ensure that the rest of your life is going to be a cakewalk or amazing or anything like that. So we just don't know. But I love that thought process of, and also the honesty of just, I don't know how I'm going to feel at 75. If that time comes, if that sadness comes up, there might be a week where she really reflects on this choice. But as she says, she's getting so much love and fulfillment from these other relationships. It doesn't all have to ride on having, as she says, her doppelganger. And this comes up almost in every single episode. That is the point of this podcast, is that families are so diverse. You can have deep love and connections with people who are not your biological child. Love is love. Fulfillment is fulfillment. And no matter what choice you make, it's going to be great. I just always feel that very firmly. But I appreciate her sharing that part of her journey, because I know that that is a question that particularly a lot of women ask themselves. Will I regret not having children? And we just don't know. And we don't even know if people who have children will regret those decisions. You just can't know. But leaving the space to just feel whatever you feel at a later date is totally the way to go. And back to the conversation.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is, I was married before I met Sam. And, I think there were very similar discussions about having kids. There were also certain medical reasons why it wasn't probably the easiest thing. I think I felt almost relieved, because I think there is that stigma and that pressure when you're younger and are married to have this, like, why don't you have kids? Right. And especially coming from the families that I came from, as well as my ex-wife, where it was like, there was like, oh, when are you? It wasn't like, oh, are you? Right. So,
Right.
yeah.
And I hear that from many couples. It's sort of, when are you getting married? And then as soon as the couple gets married, when are you having kids? When are you having your second kid? People feel very entitled to ask really personal questions.
Yeah.
It's very personal.
The same is true for, asking single people about their dating life. I mean, it's so interesting. Like if you were to ask them like, so how's your sex life? Like you just don't ask those questions back to married couples. It's interesting. I know for myself, having been single and child free well into life, yeah, it's interesting what you were saying, Sam, about how you met later. I think actually after a while, the questions don't come anymore. So for me, it was a big surprise for everybody. I'm like, so by the way, I'm 6 months pregnant. So yeah, it happens. So I also know you have amazing nieces and nephews. In fact, you have, I believe, a niece in the same building that you live in Brooklyn. And you're very much in those nieces and nephews' lives. And so how fortunate for all of you. Because parents and children have such a specific dynamic. And I can imagine that there are several scenarios where kids, particularly when they enter adolescence, could benefit from talking to parental figures who are not mom and dad. So I'm curious, can you tell us a little bit about the ways in which you've been involved in your nieces and nephews' lives?
Yeah, I think sometimes we have the luxury of just doing all the fun things, right? So, for example, my niece had a dance yesterday, and she texted me asking if I want to go get a manicure with her on Wednesday. Like, that was so much fun because we got to do it. We got to chat about it. She told me about the dance and who's going and everything else. And that was really great. And then on the other side, we will have very deep, involved discussions around life or mentorship, or like they'll ask us questions about the things that they're experiencing at work. And it's nice because I think we try and give advice, not tempered, and Todd, jump in if I'm wrong as well, but like I think it's more of like we want to respect our role without being like, this is what you should do, but this is more of like speaking from our experience. This is kind of how we would have handled it. And then kind of go through it that way and let them as growing smart adults like decide what information is valuable to them.
I think that that's such a wise way to answer those questions. My favorite yoga teacher ever gave us life homework, which was never give advice. But I think when you speak from your own experience, it's beneficial because you're like, I know what worked for me. So that's and on top of it, it avoids stepping on any toes that maybe mom and dad would be like, why did you say that?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You nailed
it. What about you, Todd?
Yeah, no, and it's funny because I think we've also learned from our mistakes on that too, right? So, we have not been perfect by any means. We've always tried to be there in a support system, but also, I couldn't agree more with your yoga instructor. And one of the things that Sam and I have really worked on in our relationship, and I think it's helped with everything else that we do, both personally and professionally, is if I'm talking about something and it's something that's, I'll just say, sensitive or emotionally sensitive, we always ask each other, is my role to listen or is my role to give feedback? And so we've just become much more direct in asking permission for whatever that is. And so I think that really trickles down to, if a niece or nephew is like, well, I'm not going to go do this. And in my head, years ago, I would have been like, don't be a knucklehead. Now I'm like, oh, I was him. I was him or I was her. And I have to come at it through the lens of how are they going to most learn those lessons in life that are most important to you as you get older and you grow personally and professionally. And so many of that is, like Sam said, is you say, well, my experience has been this, but I'm not going to tell you what to do. Like, you're now an adult, right?
Mm-hmm.
Unless you're asking me like, what should I do? I almost don't even want to answer that. I always want to just give them the perspective of where candidly I've probably failed and failed multiple times, right? And I share that with them because it's the path to really growth in your own
It's
life.
super valuable for sure. Yeah. To learn about what didn't work for you.
And
Yeah.
we've given bad advice enough times to know that we have no idea what it's like to be someone, a teenager or someone in their 20s today, because it is radically different than when we were that age. So it's like you said, I think it's more about listening and letting, through the talking, let them kind of come to their own solutions.
And what's the age range of your nieces and nephews?
14 to 24, right?
25.
Yeah.
25. Oh yeah, she turned 25. Yeah, Kayla turned 25. Yeah. Yeah.
That's probably the sweet spot of, I don't want to talk to mom and dad about this.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, have you had to navigate with your siblings? Like, have you ever had to say, like, I don't know how I feel about talking to them about this? Or, I mean, I guess it sounds like you've established really good boundaries in terms of what you're willing to do and say. And also, as you said, Todd, you've probably learned from some mistakes. Are there any examples that you would want to share in terms of like how to navigate that line?
I don't think we've ever come across something because they're all pretty open with their parents. And I don't think they've shared anything with us. And correct me again, like if I forgot that they wouldn't have shared. We've always said, we'll say like our conversations are always something that's between us. But there's no, from my memory, I don't know if there's ever been like, hey, don't tell my parents this, but. And I think either way, we would respect both sides.
Yeah, I also think we've established those lines of like saying, hey, we're not your parents. However, if there's something that you need to talk to that you don't feel comfortable talking to your parents about, we're always here, right? And I think that it's having probably that comfort knowing that there is some level of adult support that they can lean on, because we always make it abundantly clear. And we're always like, hey, is there anything you need? Like, because I think that's the fun part of, taking that ownership and responsibility of being an aunt or an uncle and like, turning it, kind of thriving in it and giving them that ability. Because I mean, selfishly, it makes us feel good. Right.
Sure,
I mean,
of course.
And that's not a bad thing. We always want to be there for them. I mean, we always want to take care of them. Especially like, I think you're right. That sweet spot between 14 and 25, it's so fun. And across all of them, they're all just wonderful. But I think that's a testament to their parents, to Sam's sisters, and my sister. Like I really, really believe that those foundations are set so we can have those real great conversations with them.
That's great. And I think similar, I hear this a lot from grandparents that, I love hanging out with my grandchildren and I love handing them back.
Or having college tuition.
There's that too. I mean, it's a pretty great position to be in where you can have these close relationships to your nieces and nephews. And I know that you've supported them in a variety of ways. But then you're also like, okay, good night.
Yeah.
You can go home and live your fabulous life, which I know you have. So in addition to being life partners, you're also business partners. And I'm curious how you've navigated intertwining those two worlds. And I also know you lead a very fabulous life. So I want to hear all about that. So you can start with just sort of how you can start with work or play. And I am curious, how business partners, that's a different dynamic than life partners. And I know that you have navigated that well, at least from my perspective. And so I'm curious to hear more about that, and also how you've managed to make that how you manage to make that transition each day between those two roles?
I don't think there are two worlds. I think there's only one world, which is this one.
Yeah.
This is the one we know. There's also no transitions because
yeah, exactly. You're like, now I'm going to speak to you this way.
Right, exactly. And, we've learned lessons for ourselves and about with each other, the easy way and the hard way because of it. And I think we have a stronger marriage and we have stronger business because we learn things like how to communicate or making sure we over communicate. So there's no like transition or on off. I think what we do really interestingly is, for example, we take walks in the mornings, and we'll do like anywhere from 3 to 5 mile walks in the morning. And that's where we do take time to really talk about what we have planned, whether it's work or life. And we make those moments to have focused conversations. But then we also, on the other side, have to make sure that we say, hey, let's make sure we have date nights to remind each other that we like each other. We'll always love each other. But like, what does a date look like? And let's not check email. So that's probably the one detail where we have to turn ourselves off or turn work off intentionally, but otherwise it's all integrated.
I mean, I also think we know each other extremely well, and there are times when I think both of us are self-aware in some ways, and I think we're aware of each other's, the picadillos of who we are and what sometimes we can engage in certain things and not engage in. And if there's always a question, I'm always like, can I talk about work for a second? Like just asking that question. Because it might be like, you know what, I'm like at empty. No. And I'll be like, cool. Okay. Then we'll save it for tomorrow or whatever. I think we've just been through enough in our lives and have just we're very different people with very similar values and things that work for us. And that's where it works extremely well. And also just honestly, just knowing how to say you're sorry, like, and just taking accountability of your life and when you're not at your best. And I think that honestly are the most important times because, we're all human beings. We all make mistakes. But at the end of the day, we like, there is just love is the only thing that I can think of when we're talking about this whole conversation, this whole podcast. Like, it's all centered around love. And so when things go a little askew or astray, it's so easy to center back when you just think about what that the ultimate outcome is.
You know what I liked? Todd had shared one day where sometimes if we have a total of 100%, recognizing that, hey, Todd, today I'm just 10%. So you need to carry the 90 or vice versa. I really appreciated that math because I think it's like, it's a very easy way for you to understand the other person and be like, hey, FYI, I'm a 10. So you need to be the 90 and caffeinate and do whatever it is. But like, you can share very quickly how you're feeling and what you need from the other person.
That's such a great and quick,
right?
indication. And that's, And also everything I'm hearing is it's not news to me that you're both have a high level of emotional intelligence. That's not revelatory to me at all. I'm curious, I know that that's kind of innate, but that also requires practice and development. I've talked to enough couples, married or not married, but they are a little concerned as they enter into a business partnership. And from everything that you've described, what would you recommend as sort of something much more tactical? Like, how do you develop that level of communication? Is it through books? Has it been, getting professional guidance? Do you have any recommendations on how to navigate that? It makes a lot of sense for there to be some fear. Sometimes you have a friend and they want to go into business with you and you're like, I don't know. It's the same thing with like living situations. Like you just don't know how that's going to go. And so I'm curious if you have any recommendations on how to enter into that other type of partnership.
We did not do this, but I think one conversation I had with a woman who was starting a business with two other friends and colleagues, I had said, what you should do is build out almost like a worst case scenario book, meaning, hey, when this happens, how are we going to handle it? Or what are the most important things for us as a successful team? Because then thinking about it like, okay, if we disagree on a decision, who's going to be the one that we turn to be the decider, right? Or what are the most important things to you as a business owner? And like almost have all of those conversations and that checklist established first so that you don't have to address it when the actual problem happens, because then you're addressing that problem emotionally versus when you're doing it from a rational, calm standpoint.
Yeah,
completely.
The one thing I would go back on is how we did it is Sam started the company. I was not part of the company at the time. I started a software company and we needed branding and naming and a website. And I was like, I might know someone who does that. And so we hired Sam, and that is when we actually learned how to work together. And so it really established those foundational elements that we knew we could, right? And I think that was the first. And so when I then hopped to a couple other jobs and was disenfranchised with the way that people were running and operating businesses, Sam is the one who came to me and said, you know, with what you do and what I do, I think we can really help build manual labor out, because you would always ask me, how do you want to teach people how to fish the way I do? I would love to do this with you and work with you. And it was the easiest decision I've ever made, you know, business-wise. There was no fear in it. We didn't have this thing of like, oh, our marriage is what if our marriage blows up? We never, ever, that ever crossed my mind.
We joked about it. We said it's all going to work or none of it's going to work. But there was never any hesitation.
Never. And I never even thought twice about like, oh gosh, what would it be like? I'm like, no, like this is it. Like, so, and I enjoy it I still get up every morning being so thankful that this is what I get to do.
Yeah.
And have an impact on young professionals and young people and employee folks. One of them happens to be our niece, who is amazing. I mean,
crazy.
But I think why like she does so well is because she holds herself accountable, right? And she has the same qualities and traits that our employees do. So it just works out. Now she's our niece, but we treat her just like any other employee, you know. And she has a boss that's not us, and it works out really well, and it's been wonderful.
That's great. Because that was actually something I was going to ask about, is that you've even worked with I think it's more than one niece, right? Or is it just the one?
We had a nephew who interned for us, and then the niece who Kayla interned for us, and then now she's working full time.
Oh, that's incredible. Yeah. And what's also nice is that you're able to mentor her. It's almost like an additional role. It's probably the same as what you've been doing in life, but it's also nice to be able to do that for her career, which is incredible. Side note, I want to take an extra beat with the name manual labor. We didn't talk about it in this conversation, but that's mainly because I know Sam and Todd. I'm aware of the backstory of the name. But because it's so inspiring, I would like to share it. The name manual labor is an homage to Sam's parents. As Sam mentioned, she and her family immigrated to the U.S. when Sam was 4. This was her mom's idea because her parents wanted a better future for Sam and her sisters. This also meant that Sam's parents had to work a lot, as she mentions, and her dad took on several jobs to make sure that he could provide for the family. And this ranged from teaching to dishwashing to stocking inventory at stores, very much manual labor. And what Sam's parents instilled in their children was the belief that anything that you do 100% and have pride in it. So the incredible work that Sam, Todd, and their team are doing at manual labor is in direct connection to that ethos. And it's a reflection of the lessons she learned growing up with her parents about rolling up sleeves, having some grit, and doing good work. I felt that deserved an extra beat, so there it is. What an incredible name. What an incredible creative agency. Nice work, Sam and Todd. And back to the conversation. What have been your biggest lessons, surprises, or takeaways from choosing to remain child-free and focusing on your nieces and nephews?
Good question.
Positives on the 14 to 25-year-olds is that, we have access. The not negatives, but like learning how to know when to drop in, drop in their DMs and be like, hey, how's it going? But I think they welcome it. Like, we see almost all of them, with the exception of our niece who is in New Jersey. We see almost some of them daily, some of them once or twice a week, and so, no, it's a very, I would say it's a very fluid way. But I also want to be respectful of their lives as they're growing up and finding things. So
we think we're the cool aunt and uncle.
Yeah,
they may think differently.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure you're the cool aunt and uncle. I know as a parent, I love the idea of having mentors or just these other like parental figures. I would love to have Dylan grow up with that kind of support and guidance. I'm curious about conversations you might have had with your siblings where they've expressed sort of their own appreciation of having you be not only part of their lives, but such a huge part.
I don't know if there was like a formal conversation, but it's always about like, we're so glad, you're a part of their lives. Or are you coming to their high school graduation on Tuesday? Like it's so integrated into part of our everyday lives that I don't know if we've ever had or needed to have a formal like, hey, we're so glad you're a part of their lives. Does that make sense?
Of course.
I think both, they've all said it in different ways. I remember your sister Jamie was like, thank you for really being such a good support system to my kids, and what's so great is that each of our nieces and nephews are so different. And, for us, we have to, shapeshift based on how we communicate or what our tone is or tenor, and be empathetic to where they're at that moment, and so it is really rewarding and it's fun. And but to your question, I think Sam has such a great relationship with her two sisters. I have a great relationship with my sister. That really helps, right? I think it's a really important thing. It makes it easier, for sure. And they're never the ones to pry me like, oh, what did they say or whatever. They really respect that relationship we have.
Yeah, I feel like everything that you've described, the nieces and nephews are so fortunate. You both are so fortunate. The parents are extremely fortunate. I can speak from the parental perspective for sure. There's several people who are just not feeling the urge to have children of their own or even adopt. And, something that I've told them, I was like, you're going to have an incredible life no matter what. And I would imagine that you've maybe had conversations as well where somebody's just like, I'm just not feeling it. And I'm curious, has anyone approached you about that, describing the societal pressure or the family pressure that they're feeling, and how have you advised them, if at all? Because I would imagine that knowing a little bit about your lives, like you picked a great path. And I really do feel like whether you choose to have children or you choose to remain child-free, you're going to have an amazing life because you can just do that. So I'm curious, have you had any conversations with people who've been on the fence, and if so, like how have you advised them?
It seems that conversations are much more casual and open than it was, let's say, like when we decided not to have kids or even prior to us. And so the dialogue feels much more laid back, where somebody will say, like, even if they're not married, they're like, oh yeah, my partner and I already decided we're not going to have kids. Not, hey, I think we're on the fence. What would you say? What is your recommendation? They've just sort of, from the ones that we've had, they've just pretty much owned the decision. It feels
Yeah.
much more ownable and sort of open now than I think it was 10, 20 years ago.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I also think it can be also be related to like the company we keep. It can be socioeconomic. It can be
Sure.
all of those factors. But if I maybe like lived in the South where,
Good point.
right?
Yeah.
So when I lived in Charleston,
Right.
in my first marriage, we got that question all the time.
Different conversation.
That's right. and they're like, oh, it was very much a little bit of that.
Side note. Great point, Todd. Yeah, social norms are quite regional. And yes, the company you keep could really dictate what kind of conversations you're having. The openness that Sam and Todd are referring to has a lot to do with the fact that they're in Brooklyn, New York, a pretty progressive area. I can say from my own experience, whether it was traveling abroad or anywhere in the US, the questions people ask you tell you a lot about the social norms of that area. So, very good point. And to your other points about socioeconomic, yeah, lots of things go into how decisions are perceived, whether it's being child free, whether it's being a solo parent, or whether it's having a unique family in general. Excellent point. And back to the conversation.
A good friend of mine has a 4-year-old that, let's just say, was not produced by design. And so, or by planning, and they weren't looking to have a child. And they were just like, well, this is okay. This is what it is. And they just rolled with it, and they've never looked back. And they're just grateful that it happened. Right. And that they were the lucky ones that the child is healthy, is making them be better people. To Sam's point, I don't see it as much of a stigma as it was even 10 years ago.
I agree. And I think a lot of that has to do with people being really honest about what the parenting experience is like.
Yeah.
And also how expensive it is. It is unbelievably expensive to have a child, especially in the US and especially in certain cities like yours and like mine. Tell me about some of the advantages that you really enjoy by being child-free.
I think the biggest one would probably be our vacation hacks, meaning we go on vacation when your kids are all at school. So
travel.
The perfect time is June, early June, right? Everybody is still in school and we get to kind of go before it's like overpopulated and things like that. That's probably, I think, the biggest benefit because we are not tied to an academic schedule.
Yeah. Yeah. And tell us about those vacations.
I think the other thing too is, as we're business owners and we do like to travel, we figure out ways to make those. And like we said, there's no this or that. As business owners, we're always on. And so, whether we've taken a recent trip to Hawaii and we just woke up at 3 a.m., we worked. We worked for like 5-6 hours. And by the time that was done, it's 5 o'clock on the East Coast. So, and then we're like, okay, well, we can now go play or, go sit in the water or do whatever.
Totally.
Yeah. Even as we're a week from today, we'll be heading to Cannes in France.
Love that.
And we're going a couple days early to, celebrate our 10-year anniversary. So we just find ways to make that work. Without kids, it's so easy to travel because we don't have children, right? And it's just, we see when we're traveling and it's like, it's hard, it's hard enough with one child. You see people with 3.
So admirable.
More, and I'm like, gosh, I really applaud them, right? And it can be, I can't imagine what it's like.
And I think, Nicole, you had kind of mentioned it, just the sheer amount of space you need. And, we live in a small apartment in Brooklyn, and it's just the right size for the two of us and a 22-pound dog. And so when you have kids, obviously there's a literal growing need for more space. And so we don't have that dependency where we have to move because of what is required and what's needed. So I think that's probably the other obvious benefit around like what it is that what control do we have of our own lives that we don't, that I think people with kids have to make in terms of like new decisions as their children grow or they have more children.
The only other thing I would say beyond travel is dining. We don't have to worry about like, oh, well, my kid's allergic to peanuts, or just dining's expensive with additional kids. I mean,
right.
we have those luxuries that we don't have to think about that, and we can say, oh, well, do you want to just go to our restaurant around the corner, like versus, oh my God, I got to make lunch tomorrow for my kid, or I have to help them learn, algebra or whatever that is. Those are the things that like time. We have time.
You have
Well,
time.
yeah, because I think as business owners, we have to make decisions all the time, all day. And so it's one less thing that we really have to think about when it comes to meals or not needing to meal prep or not needing to plan, because we can kind of do it on the fly because it's just the two of us. So there's a little bit more freedom and flexibility, because the other side of the spectrum is we are deciding all day.
And you do have your fur baby, Sadie. So I would imagine that any itch to do any caregiving gets well satisfied by Sadie.
She's a handful.
Also very adorable and has the best side eye. I'm going to get a picture from you.
She's about as judgmental as a 13-year-old girl probably would be.
That is the best. I've never heard of a dog being judgmental, but I love it. I love it. Can you give me a scenario where she's like,
yeah. Well, she's judgmental side eye, but then she's also very vocal. So for example, if we're leaving and we're not moving fast enough to go out, she will literally herd us, like run back to one of whoever the slow one is, howl at us, and then run back to the door. So she's judgmental, but she's also very vocal about her disappointment with us.
So there are parallels.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I said. It's like having
you have quite a hybrid. You have a hybrid dog child. We've talked a little bit about how rich your life is. And I think it's really important for me to show anyone curious about like the different types of families that exist. I think you have an incredible one. I do think that nieces and nephews hugely benefit from having I'm speaking generally, but gosh, just because I know the two of you, how fortunate your nieces and nephews are, especially given your high level of emotional intelligence. It's just a huge benefit. And I do think there's huge value in playing that role and then also having your own lives that you can lead. And especially given the number of conversations that I've had, because I had Dylan a little bit later. So I think people are even more curious when they talk to me about just like, oh, well, what was your life like before? I'm like, it was amazing. It was amazing. And so it's just sort of like, either way, it doesn't matter which way you choose. I think that we are, there's a lot less control, let's say, when you like control of your own life when you have a child. But I think in general, it's what you make of it. And like you said, Todd, the friends of yours who had a happy surprise baby, it's like, it's just you roll with what your life looks like, and it's going to be as amazing as you make it. And I definitely think the two of you are making and building a beautiful life. And also, huge congrats. You just recently won an award from the Drum on a brand campaign. So huge congrats. That's a big deal.
Oh,
and it just shows the incredible studio that you've built, the two of you, and Sam with your vision as founder. Congratulations. I think that's incredible.
Thank you.
Did you want to add anything to anyone listening to hear about like the life of a dink?
No, I think you had said a lot about how our nieces and nephews benefit, but I think it goes both ways because
Oh, for sure.
the
Yeah.
closeness that we have with them, watching them grow up, we do get to experience the joy, the curiosity, the first time things that they see through their eyes too. And so we get that fulfillment from them. Whereas I think, I don't know, if we weren't as close to them, if we didn't have them, would we miss that? And I think that we had that experience almost as parents because we were so close and we got to see them in real time, going to a dance, getting their first job, riding a swing, learning how to swim, all that stuff. So we had the benefit of childhood experiences through their eyes.
I think Sam really nailed it. I think it's like I've learned more from them, and I feel like I'm in this next phase of learning and growth, and it's from places I'm not sure I knew I would get that from, and it's humbling and it's so interesting, and they're just so different from where we were in our lives, but not right. They're just experiencing different things that thankfully we didn't have to worry about. We didn't have to worry about social media.
They're experiencing a reality that didn't exist for us, and I definitely need to read Anxious Generation. I know that is one of probably many books that addresses exactly that. There's just a new level of anxiety that didn't exist when we were growing up. I mean, we had plenty of anxiety of lots of things, and particularly probably divorce was a big one, right? A lot of children experiencing that. Although I have to say, Todd, in your case, parents who were very forward thinking, ahead of their time in terms of how they handled that. But yeah, the kids today, it's a little alarming, and it's actually really informative for me in terms of how I raise Dylan. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining us today and sharing what your family looks like. And it's a beautiful one. And I hope it inspires anyone listening who might be on the fence, or who might be getting that feeling inside of like, I don't think I want to have children. I think I want to live, a child-free life. It's a wonderful option. And I think you both are really crushing it. And congrats on that.
Thank you.
And thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nicole.
Also, if you're part of a unique family and you want to have a conversation with me, please reach out. doingthisdifferently.com. Happy to chat with you. I think it's really important, as I've had these conversations with all these different families, normalizing what makes your family unique is really helpful. It also helps children learn about inclusion and opens their minds as well as their parents, and gives everybody a shared language and understanding of what it means to be a unique family. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.